The village of Harrow's Edge did not measure time by clocks. It measured time by tides. When the sea rose high against the black rocks, fishermen delayed their boats. When it pulled back and revealed wet sand like polished glass, children ran barefoot along the shore collecting shells shaped like tiny spirals. And when the waves struck the cliffs with deep, rolling thunder, people closed their windows and brewed stronger tea, as if sound itself carried weather inside it. For generations, the sea had been their calendar, their warning system, and their reassurance. It had moods, yes, but it had never betrayed them. Belief, when repeated for decades, stops feeling like belief. It becomes fact. At the far end of the coastline, standing slightly apart from the clustered stone houses and wooden docks, was a tower. It was not tall enough to be impressive, not wide enough to be called grand. Just a narrow cylinder of weathered stone rising from the edge of the cliff like a forgotten finger pointing at the sky. Most villagers no longer looked at it. Children asked what it was. Adults answered vaguely. An old warning tower. Before our time. Doesn't work anymore. They were all correct. And all wrong. Because while the tower no longer rang bells or burned signal fires the way it once had, it was not abandoned. It was maintained. By one man. Elias Marrow did not live in the center of the village. He lived beside the tower in a small wooden house that leaned slightly toward the sea as if listening. He was not unfriendly. He simply did not speak unless speech felt necessary. He repaired fishing nets when asked. He sharpened knives for the elderly without payment. He delivered driftwood bundles to widows during winter. But what people remembered most about him was not kindness. It was routine. Every morning before sunrise, Elias climbed the spiral staircase inside the tower. Every evening before sunset, he climbed it again. Rain or clear skies, winter wind or summer calm, he climbed. The villagers joked about it at first. Guarding ghosts, someone once laughed at the dock. Listening for ships that no longer sail, another added. Elias never argued. He never explained. He simply continued climbing. Inside the tower, the air smelled of salt and iron. Rust marked the railings like freckles. Old rope coils hung along the walls, brittle but carefully arranged. Near the top sat a large circular lens, cracked along one edge, clouded with age, yet polished every day until it caught even the weakest sunlight. Elias would wipe dust from the glass, check the hinges on the outer shutters, oil the ancient bell mechanism that no one had heard ring in years, and then stand still. Not looking at the sea, listening to it. He paid attention to details that others never noticed. The direction of gulf lights before noon. The thickness of foam along the shoreline. How far the tide retreated compared to last month. The pitch of waves against hollow rock instead of solid stone. To the villagers, the sea was background noise. To Elias, it was language. Summer arrived gently that year. The kind of summer that convinced people nothing bad could possibly follow it. Fishermen returned with heavy catches. Markets filled with bright cloth and salted fish. Children swam farther from shore than usual because the water felt warmer, calmer, inviting. Even the wind behaved politely. The tower became a silhouette people barely noticed against golden sunsets. Elias still climbed it twice a day. Now the jokes softened into indifference. Mockery requires attention. Indifference is quieter. One morning, a boy named Tomas followed Elias halfway up the tower steps before losing courage. "Why do you keep fixing it?" he asked from below, voice echoing against stone. Elias paused but did not descend. "Because it still stands," he replied. "That's not an answer," Tomas insisted. Elias looked down, sunlight cutting across his face through a narrow slit window. Standing things fall faster when no one checks them. The boy frowned, unsatisfied, and ran back toward the docks where laughter was easier to understand than caution. Weeks passed. The sea remained generous. The village remained confident. Only small things began to change. The tide arrived 7 minutes earlier than usual. Then 9. Then 12. No one noticed except Elias. A distant lighthouse miles away failed to blink one evening. Villagers assumed a broken bulb. Elias noted the absence of reflection on the water. Seagulls began circling inland before storms that never arrived. Children called it strange. Adults called it coincidence. Elias called it pattern. One night, he lit the tower's old lantern for the first time in years. Not bright, not a blazing beacon, just a steady glow visible from the harbor. The villagers saw it and laughed the next morning. Expecting pirates, trying to impress the moon. Elias did not defend himself. He extinguished the light at dawn and returned to polishing the lens. Because preparation before danger appears always looks theatrical. And yet, the sea had begun breathing differently. Longer pauses between waves, deeper echoes in the cliffs, a silence between gusts of wind that lingered too long. The tower bell had not rung. The storm had not formed. Nothing dramatic had happened. But the man who listened instead of watched had already begun tightening the ropes. The change did not arrive with thunder. It arrived with silence. For the first time in living memory, the sea at Harrow's Edge stopped making noise at night. Not completely, not unnaturally, just less. Waves still moved, but they no longer struck the cliffs with their usual authority. They touched the rock instead of colliding with it. Fishermen lying awake in their beds noticed something missing but could not name it. Sleep felt thinner. Morning revealed nothing dramatic. Boats floated where they always had. Nets dried on wooden posts. Children argued over shells again. But Elias climbed the tower before sunrise instead of after it. From the upper platform, the horizon looked wider than usual. Not because the sky had changed, because the water had pulled back farther than it should have. The tide charts hanging inside the tower did not match what he saw. He ran his fingers across faded ink marks from years before, comparing measurements. The numbers disagreed with the shoreline. Numbers rarely lie. Shorelines sometimes do. That evening he lit the lantern again. This time earlier. This time brighter. The harbor reacted with curiosity rather than laughter. Strange timing, one fisherman muttered while tying his boat. Maybe fog coming, another guessed. There was no fog. The sky remained painfully clear. 2 days later, the first visible sign appeared, not in the water, but in the birds. Seagulls abandoned the pier. They did not scatter. They relocated, higher inland, resting on rooftops instead of mast poles. Birds do not hold meetings. They move. Children noticed first. Adults dismissed it as migration confusion. Elias oiled the bell mechanism again. Twice in one day. By midweek, the tide retreated farther than anyone had ever walked. Wet sand stretched like a second beach beyond the first. Rock formations emerged that no one under 40 had seen before. Crabs scuttled in exposed pools as if surprised by their own visibility. The village reacted with excitement instead of fear. Treasure ground, teenagers called it. Perfect fishing tomorrow, the elders predicted. Confidence grows quickly when evidence feels harmless. Elias descended from the tower with unusual speed. He walked straight to the docks, scanning boats, ropes, and anchor lines. He did not shout. He did not order. He simply began tightening knots that were already tight. A fisherman laughed, expecting the sea to run away. Elias replied quietly, expecting it to return. The words carried no drama, only weight. That night, the wind vanished entirely. Windows remained open, yet curtains did not move. The smell of salt grew faint, replaced by dry air that felt wrong for a coastal village. People slept poorly. Dogs barked at nothing. Cats refused to leave porches. And still, no storm clouds formed. The next morning, the harbor floor lay exposed. Boats tilted awkwardly on mud that should have been water. Fish flopped in shallow pools left behind like forgotten belongings. Now the village gathered in confusion. Not panic, confusion. This has happened before, someone insisted. Long tides exist, another argued. But older fishermen stared without speaking. Memory does not always provide comfort. Sometimes it provides warning. Elias climbed the tower again. This time he rang the bell. The sound cut across the empty harbor like metal through glass. It had not been heard in decades. People froze mid-step. One strike, two, three. Not an alarm. A signal. Villagers looked toward the tower expecting smoke or flame. There was neither. Only the steady ringing and a lantern still glowing in full daylight. He was not warning of wind. He was warning of water. Children began running inland without knowing why. Parents followed them without admitting fear. Fishermen hesitated the longest. Men who trusted the sea more than land always do. The shoreline remained quiet. Too quiet. Silence is rarely empty. Sometimes it is the space before something enormous inhales. From the top of the tower, Elias finally saw it. Not a wall of water, not a towering wave, but a dark line forming far beyond the exposed seabed. It did not look violent. It looked inevitable. He rang the bell again, faster this time, because the sea had not disappeared. It had only stepped back. And stepping back is not retreat when the return carries momentum. The line on the horizon did not rush forward. It expanded. At first it resembled a shadow stretching across the water. Then it gained height. Then weight. From the village, it still looked distant, a darker shade of blue beneath a bright sky. But from the tower, Elias saw what distance was hiding. The sea was lifting itself, not crashing, rising. He rang the bell without pause now. Each strike echoed across rooftops, bouncing between stone walls and wooden shutters. People no longer wondered why. They moved. Children were already halfway up the inland path. Mothers grabbed blankets instead of buckets. Fathers untied nothing. Boats were abandoned where they leaned. When urgency replaces pride, movement becomes instinct. The exposed harbor floor began to tremble, not from the earth, but from returning water finding its speed. The first surge arrived not as a towering wave, but as a fast-moving sheet. It slid across the seabed, swallowing rocks and pools in seconds. Fish vanished. Mud vanished. Distance vanished. Then the second surge came. This one carried height. From the cliffs it looked like the sea correcting itself all at once. Water rose higher than the docks, higher than the boats, higher than the stone steps carved by generations. Wood cracked. Ropes snapped. Masts bent like reeds. But houses stood empty. The bell continued. Not warning now, confirming. The village did not watch from the shore. They watched from the hills. A silent crowd looking down as their familiar coastline rearranged itself in minutes. No screams. No chaos. Only breath held collectively. The waves struck the harbor walls with a force no storm had delivered in decades. Water climbed streets where children once played. Barrels floated. Doors burst open. Then, just as quickly, the surge slowed. It did not linger. It withdrew. Not fully. Never fully. But enough to reveal what preparation had changed. Boats were damaged, but not lost at sea. Nets were soaked, but not swept away. Homes were wet, but not destroyed. Because people had moved before impact. Because warning had arrived before disaster. The second wave never came. Sometimes nature does not need repetition. One correction is enough. By evening, the sea returned to its usual rhythm as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Waves struck the cliffs again. Gulls returned to the pier. The harbor filled with water that pretended innocence. Villagers descended slowly, cautiously, as if stepping back into a place that had briefly revealed its true size. No one accused the sea. No one praised it. They simply walked among damp streets and broken planks, measuring loss in repairs instead of funerals. The tower lantern still burned. Elias extinguished it only after sunset. Not ceremonially, not dramatically, just a hand turning a small valve. People approached him later, not with applause, not with speeches, but with nods. Acknowledgement without noise. They had laughed at the tower once. They had called it unnecessary. They had treated the lantern as habit. Now they understood. It was not light that saved them. It was attention. The tower remained after that day, unchanged in height, unchanged in stone, but transformed in meaning. Children no longer saw a relic. They saw a watchpoint, Fishermen no longer ignored its glow. They checked it before sleep. The sea did not become an enemy. It remained what it always was: vast, indifferent, rhythmic. What changed was the village. They learned that disasters rarely begin with noise. They begin with absence, with birds moving inland, with tides retreating too far, with bells ringing before storms exist. Elias never called himself a hero. He never described what he saw from the tower. He simply resumed climbing the steps each evening, lighting the lantern when the horizon felt wrong, and leaving it dark when the sea behaved like itself. Because the tower did not save the village by being tall. It saved them because someone chose to look before the water chose to return.